In the halls of power, where promises are made and forgotten at the same speed, the recent exchange between Conservative MP Jerome Moyet and the Labour Party lays bare a growing truth. Labour's leadership has failed to deliver on the core promises that brought them into office. What was once hailed as a party of hope and transformation has devolved into a tangled mess of contradictions, half-baked policies, and, most damning of all, a loss of trust. The Labour government's tenure has come to an end with a resounding question echoing across the chambers: can the British public ever believe in their promises again? Moyet's grilling of the Labour minister in Parliament was more than just political theatre. It was a stark reminder that the gap between Labour's pre-election rhetoric and post-election reality has grown too wide to ignore. With unflinching directness, Moyet called out Labour's economic failures, specifically accusing them of abandoning key policies and undermining their own stated goals. The Conservative MP's question about whether Labour was truly honest with the electorate about cuts to disability welfare struck at the heart of the Labour government's credibility issues. Here was a party that had campaigned on fairness, on taking care of the most vulnerable in society, yet was now forced to defend policies that looked strikingly like the ones they had promised to eradicate. The core of the Labour Party's failures lies in its inability to follow through on its promises. Labour came to power on the backs of voters who believed their claims of a fairer society, who believed their commitment to welfare reform would ease the burdens of the most disadvantaged. Yet, as Moyet pointed out, the harsh reality was a failure to present any viable economic recovery plan, with money squandered and promises broken. This is a kind of incompetence that shatters trust, not just in the leadership, but in the entire political system. To claim that there was no coherent strategy for economic recovery was not simply a criticism, it was an indictment of a government that had forgotten its core purpose: to serve the people who trusted them. Labour's hypocrisy is not just an inconvenient truth, it is the elephant in the room that cannot be ignored. The party has painted itself as the voice of the people, the saviour of the vulnerable, the champion of economic fairness. But time and again, it has proven itself to be little more than another establishment party that says one thing to secure votes and does another once in power. It is this contradiction that infuriates those who voted for change, only to find that the Labour Party's promises were no more than hollow pledges made for political gain. The failure to deliver on welfare reform, especially for the disabled, reveals the deep moral and political rot within Labour. The same party that once vowed to protect the most vulnerable now finds itself on the defensive, unable to justify the cuts it has implemented. It is not just a policy failure, it is a betrayal of the very people they claim to protect. The welfare state was meant to be the safety net for those who need it most, but under Labour, it has become a target for cuts. This is a party that ran on a platform of inclusion and equality, only to abandon those values the moment it suited their political interests. How, then, can they expect to retain any semblance of trust when their actions contradict their words so blatantly? Moyet's questioning highlights a fundamental truth about political leadership. It is not enough to make grand promises in an election campaign, leaders must be held accountable for delivering on them. The Labour Party has failed in this regard, and the consequences are clear for anyone willing to look. As the government's tenure comes to a close, the lingering question is not just whether they have failed on the economy or welfare reform, but whether they have fundamentally betrayed the trust of the British people. Labour's inability to deliver on its core promises of fairness and economic recovery has set a dangerous precedent for future political leadership. For many, the damage done by Labour's broken promises is irreparable. Trust in government is a fragile thing, and once lost, it is difficult, if not impossible, to regain. As Moyet pointed out, the Labour government's inability to present a coherent plan and their failure to act on key issues has left them in a precarious position. The political vacuum that now exists is one that demands answers. Where was the transparency? Where was the accountability? Where were the leaders who promised change but delivered nothing but more of the same? The public deserves better than empty rhetoric and political posturing. The Labour Party's time in power has been marked by a string of failures, but perhaps the greatest failure of all is their loss of integrity. The hard questions asked by Moyet were not just about economic policy or welfare reform, they were about the very soul of the Labour Party. Had they truly been the party of the people, or had they simply played the role for political expediency? As the dust settles on this chapter of British politics, one thing is certain: Labour's legacy is not one of hope or change, but one of disillusionment and broken trust. Their tenure has left the nation with more questions than answers, and the questions only grow louder as the government's failure becomes clearer. If Labour wants to recover any semblance of respect or credibility, it must answer for its failures, own its mistakes, and demonstrate that it can be the party of real change, not just empty promises. Until then, the shadow of betrayal will hang over them, and the trust of the British people will remain forever lost.